businessman said the Negro agitation is being paid for by the Jews who run this country.
Okay.
Fulton did vote for the bill. Now, interestingly, only 2 members of the Tennessee delegation voted for the bill that year. The other was Ross Bass of Pulaski, Tennessee, the birthplace of the Ku Klux Klan. He and Frank Clement were in a primary race for the Senate that year. And make a long story short, both were very pro-civil rights, as you may remember. Fulton, for the first time, had a Republican opponent who was viable. Bill Wills, a local businessman, later worked for Nixon. He got 50,000 votes, which was far more than any Republican had ever done in Davidson County, and which was the whole district consisted of Davidson County at that time. Now, 1965 came the Voting Rights Act. This was not as unpopular or as controversial, and in fact, again, a majority of the Tennessee delegation, including both senators, voted for the bill. He did make another proposal which might have caused more controversy that year when he sponsored the bill to end capital punishment in federal crimes. He was very anti-capital punishment. And then he didn't have a difficult re-election in 1966, but an issue came up in 1968. The most important one, and the one that almost killed him, was the Open Housing Act. Now, the Open Housing Act, ending discrimination in housing, was a bill that was very unpopular nationwide. It was really aimed as much at the North as it was at the South, with the housing discrimination and people forced to live in just certain sections of town. Fulton, on March 30th of that year, 5 days before the Martin Luther King assassination, announced that he would vote for the bill. He was the only Tennessee congressman to vote for the bill, although both of our senators, Howard Baker and Albert Gore Sr., voted for it, but none of the House. He said in his statement that a Negro policeman was recently killed in action. How could I tell his family they can't live where they want? I've voted to send men to Vietnam. How could I tell that man he can't buy, one of those veterans coming back, that he can't buy a home where he wants because of his skin color? And interestingly, the only Republican in the Texas delegation said the same thing when he voted for it, and that was George Bush Sr. Fulton had a very difficult race that fall, and he probably would have lost. His Republican opponent was George Kelly, a local businessman. He's well known with his flower shops. He was also, like Fulton, very handsome man, very good local businessman. He was an athlete, had been a star basketball player at Vanderbilt, and in fact, he and Fulton had played against each other in 1944 for the local championship. And he had been a supporter of Fulton in 1956, the first time he ran. In any case, Kelly ran as a Republican that year, and of course he hit on this issue, and of course the country was divided that year. George Wallace ran a campaign, and everybody was talking about law and order. You had that nightmare of a Democratic convention. That fall, interestingly, the Nashville Banner, which had been so anti-Fulton before, endorsed all the incumbent congressmen and said almost nothing about the congressional race. For that reason, I guess Mr. Stallman came around to seeing Fulton as useful. He was on the Ways and Means Committee, could help local business. The thing that really helped him, though, and assured his re-election, is that George Wallace, a local attorney, Bill Burton, who was a member of the John Birch Society, ran as an independent, as a backer of George Wallace, and attached himself to the Wallace campaign, even though they disavowed him. He siphoned off about 10% of the vote, and Fulton squeaked by with 8,000 votes. Otherwise, Nashville would have, 5th District for the first time would have had a Republican congressman, although he'd probably been out the next time.
That's Andrew Jackson's seat, was it?
Right, exactly. Andrew Jackson's first congressman from this district. Fulton had, we're getting low on time, so I'll skip to the 1972 election. He had one more difficult race, and that was 1972. Of course, busing was a major issue that year, and parents, both white and black, were histrionic about what was going on. And Fulton had, first he had Wallace backer, who had almost beaten Mayor Briley in the runoff in 1971, Casey Jenkins. He was a Wallace supporter. He ran the primary, but only got 26%. That fall, Alf Adams, well-known locally, his father was a football hero and a former chancellor of Davidson County. ran a very well-financed campaign, tied himself very much to President Nixon, and tied Fulton very much to George McGovern, a Republican or a Democratic nominee. He was considered very radical. Hit Fulton on busing, even though Fulton had introduced anti-busing legislation, and hit him on a lot of other things, including Jane Fonda. And and by the way, the Republicans I interviewed, George Kelly, Alf Adams, and former Governor Dunn, were all very gracious, and I thank them very much for their help.
Okay.
Fulton won with 63% that year, and that was the same margin by which Nixon carried Davidson County, the only time a Republican has carried this county. It's the first and last time. So Fulton, throughout those 10 years, was able to win, first of all, because Nashville is a little different from the rest of the South. Middle Tennessee, you've got Hill Country Democrats who are basically very liberal, or more progressive, more in favor of things like TVA. You've got, of course, here an active political black community, about 20% of the population, and you've got a black intellectual community with 4 colleges sitting around a larger intellectual community. You've got, although you have many conservative Protestants here.
Okay, and of course, Professor Pickard, we're running out of time, but in essence, Fulton played a very, very significant role in the civil rights movement in terms of perhaps unwittingly moving that movement forward. Would you say that that would be?
I would say, if I don't know that he, I mean, the legislation would have passed without his vote too, but he was so good at providing service for this district that
very good.
Yeah.
Okay, and of course, let me thank you, Professor Pickard, for giving us that information, and let me encourage our audience to tune in again next week for another informative edition of Comments. Thank you, and good morning.